Hello ladies and gentlemen, Gapesta here. This is the Heroic Raid Guide for Spoils of Pandaria. And as always, in this video I'll cover primarily heroic mechanics, so if you want an update on the basic mechanics of this fight, you can check out the normal raid guide for this fight. So let's get started. Now for your raid composition, this fight is fairly standard fare. You'll need 2 tanks and 2 healers and the rest a variety of DPS. The DPS type that you utilize doesn't matter a whole lot, although a balance between your groups seems to be ideal. So similar to how you would set up in normal, you want to do the same thing in heroic. So 1 or 2 melee on each side and the rest range DPS is usually how it will go down. Melee tend to have stronger overall DPS on this encounter due to the cleave, but they cannot deal with the new heroic mechanic, which we'll talk about in a moment, known as the sparks, as easily as the ranged can. So a balance is ideal. The one new addition on heroic is unstable sparks. And the way these work is fairly simple. When your particular group destroys the contents of one of the crates during the encounter, so basically you destroy all the enemies that spawned out of a single crate, an unstable spark will spawn and travel over to the other side of the room, basically the opposite side, where the other group is active at the time, and it will have to be dealt with by that group. So essentially, you get 1 spark on the other side of the room for every crate that you end up opening or destroying throughout the encounter. Now to deal with a spark, it's pretty simple. Once it spawns, it generally spawns kind of in the center of the room that's opposite it. And it has about 1 million health, and when it appears, it has a 10-second cast time of supernova. If it is not destroyed before the 10-second supernova completes, it will do an AE that hits everyone on your side of the room, basically, on your side of the raid. And this is not necessarily a one-shot mechanic, but it's pretty close. If players are not full health, a supernova will likely kill you, is the best way to think of it. So for the most part, the main goal here on heroic to deal with unstable sparks is to make sure you have enough DPS that can focus on them and kill them within that 10-second period as they appear. And you have to do this while you're maintaining the other DPS requirements and doing everything else that's normally involved with opening crates and all that good stuff. Now to manage the unstable sparks, there are a few ways to do it, but I'll just give a few tips that we found over the course of our progression and subsequent kills. The first thing is to, again, make sure you have a balance of DPS. So specifically, you want a little bit of range, a little bit of melee, or if not any melee, at least range DPS, because unstable sparks tend to spawn in the center of the room. As you can see, they're popping up kind of right where my character is, and that tends to be far away from where the melee are at times. So it's much easier, usually, for your ranged and your healers to deal with the sparks. Other than that, the best thing you can do is to make sure your tank is actively pulling the mobs that they're able to pull toward the center of the room where the sparks are appearing, such that any cleave damage from the tank or the melee DPS will also be able to hit the sparks. So we'll talk more about that in the sort of order or strategy section. But basically what our tank tried to do, and the other tank as well, but you can't see it here, is to pull the larger mobs toward the center of the room so that while we're DPSing them, any sparks that happen to pop up can kind of get cleaved down automatically without having to go out of our way to focus on them. Now before you begin attempts on this encounter, the best thing you can do is decide for your particular group or side of the room the rough order that you're going to open crates in and why you're doing that, essentially. So my group is generally the right side or the northern side, and therefore I can go through the specific order that we use, that we came up with, that worked best for us, and you can adapt this as needed for your own groups as well. The other group that's also in our raid, the south side, doesn't quite follow this order. They do something slightly different, but the best thing you can do is come up with an order that works for your party, and then you just repeat it every week or every attempt until you get the fight down. But again, having a good sense of why you're doing it in particular order is important. So for my group, as we were learning this fight, the best method we came up with that seemed to work well for us was to sort of focus on segregating the crates or the spawns that come out of the crates based on the danger of combining them. So essentially what we found worked best was to never spawn large mobs or large crates at the same time as mediums, but then allow ourselves to do larges and smalls simultaneously to be more efficient, so that while we're dealing with the large mob that will take a while, we can also deal with some of the small stuff and just kind of cleave that down in sort of miscellaneous fashion. So the best way to show our specific order is just to walk through it, and at the top left you'll be able to see what we're going through, what we're planning as the actual footage shows you what that looks like in action. So this footage is a little faster than normal speed, just to get through this a little bit quicker. But we'll basically walk through the north room so you can see it in action. So we start in the Mogu room here with opening the far right Pandaran crate, and our melee or tank pick it up, make sure that he has enough threat, and then he pulls it over toward the other crate by the door. It will usually die around the time it gets over there. Make sure someone clicks the orb. And then here we pretty much open everything in the corner at the same time. And this is where most of our cleave damage will occur on this phase. So you can see the second set is basically the second Pandaran plus the 3 smalls plus the large that's in the corner here. What this means is that we will always get an urn that will spawn back here, a burial urn. So it's important that your melee and tank in particular are between the urn and the wall, so that when the sparks of life spawn from that urn, they don't cross over the melee and hit everyone, because there can be a lot of spike damage there. Otherwise, the basic goal is to cleave down the urn plus the second Pandaran quickly, and then everything else will just kind of fall over at the same time. Once all the little stuff is dead, the tank pulls the big guy out to the center so that it can be dealt with spark cleave at the same time. And as the big guy is about to die, then someone opens the medium crates that are clockwise from that original corner. So there you saw I opened the 2 medium crates, which is the third step in our process. So this kind of ties into the original plan that we came up with, which is never combine mediums and larges, because it can be somewhat problematic. So once the 2 mediums here are pretty much dealt with, then we do another set clockwise from where they originally were, which is the final small crate that we need, since we only need 4 of them, and the second large. So the crate, the small stuff dies just instantly, pretty much, and then the large is again pulled to the center so that sparks can be cleaved down at the same time. It's important in the Mogu room that people deal with the stone statues in a reasonable time frame, because the more of those that are active, the more damage that the main or large boss will do when he does his AE stomp sort of attack. So you don't want too many stone statues active at the same time. And these mechanics all exist on normal, it's just they're actually important on heroic. So again, once the large is about dead, then we open the next set, which is 2 mediums, again clockwise from the previous section, so that our travel time is reduced as much as possible from the previous spot. And then we deal with these 2 mediums just like we did before. You can see here I'm helping out with sparks and all that good stuff. And then once these 2 mediums are dealt with, then the final thing we need is the last 2 mediums. So basically in total, the way our group found worked best was to spawn the fewest sparks for the opposite group as possible, which means 2 larges, 6 mediums, 4 smalls. And that will be the least number of crates that you can open to do it. So there you saw I opened the medium near the door while our tank got the other medium that was closer to him. And then he pulls the 2 mobs near one another and we cleave them down again. It's important to note that you do not need to focus the phylactery primarily. You can just attack the ritualist, and any damage dealt to one will deal damage to the other if they share health pools. So there you go, that's the North Mogu room order. So now we'll move on to the Mantid order. So again, the footage is sped up a bit from normal, but the basic order, as you can see in the top left, is that we initially open the Pandaran crate nearest to the door as we're coming in, along with the medium crate that's right by it, and our tank pulls both of those toward the opposite side of the room. Meanwhile, we open the other medium that's back here in the corner. You can see the one I just opened, and the second Pandaran crate. So we're essentially dealing with 2 Pandaran and 2 medium at the start of our initial pull. Once those are pretty much dealt with, then we move on to the second sort of set or stage, which is the 2 smalls and 1 large that is immediately to our right, essentially, facing the outside of the room. So it's important that you deal with most of these mobs, especially the Pandaren, before you open the rest of those, because they can be a little bit dangerous to combine. So there you see I'm opening the 2 smalls and the large for our next wave or set. And just like before, just like in the Mogu room, once the small stuff is dealt with, then our tank pulls the big guy toward the center so that it can be in position to cleave down the unstable spark spawns and all that good stuff. Now, in terms of overall strategy, the Mantid room is probably more difficult than the Mogu room, I would say, just simply because of the potential damage that can go on from the large spawns in particular, as well as your ranged DPS and potential healers running around dropping bombs and stuff. But there you can see once the large is dead, then we move on to the third wave, which is double mediums, just like before, pretty much. And again, we're going near to where we were before, so we don't have to travel around the room as much. So the mediums are clockwise from our original large position. And once the mediums are pretty much dealt with, then we'll move on to the next set, which is 2 more smalls, the last 2 smalls we need, over here in the corner by the last large. So there you can see I'm opening those up. And then the process repeats. Once the smalls are dead, we pull the large into the center and help kill sparks at the same time. Pretty self-explanatory. And as a healer, depending if you get the heal buff from the Pandaren or not, you may be able to help out quite a bit on DPS, especially for the sparks. So really everyone should be helping wherever they can to meet the DPS requirement. The actual healing requirement on this fight is fairly insignificant. There's spike damage, and obviously it's important to deal with that when necessary, but otherwise it's not that big of a deal. So another set of sparks, and we're finishing the large. And then as this large is about to die, we do the last 2 mediums. So it's just like the rough pattern that we used before, with the exception of the start, since positioning requires it. And here we kind of know based on the time remaining if we can send over one of our members to help out the other group or not. So both groups can take this in consideration. If one group has a little bit more DPS, they finish early, or are going to finish early, you can send over a DPS to drop down to the other side and help out. So our warrior's going over there right now. So there you go. That's the basic ordering that works really well for the north side of the room. And again, the south side group will have to, they can do roughly the same thing, but just based on the crate positions, they'll have to come up with something slightly different, or just the starting positions to be slightly different. Finally, we'll talk a bit about some general tips to get through this fight on Heroic, since the requirements are significantly bumped up from normal. So first is just have a plan for each room. I talked about this a bit before, but the best thing you can do is, once your groups are split up and sort of assigned, to take a look at the rooms from above before you even get into the fight, and plan out your general crate order, your path, all that good stuff. You can use raid markers even, and kind of get a sense of, this is what we're going to do first, and then we're going to do the second, and so on and so forth. It will make things a lot easier for you knowing what you're doing next before you actually get down there, because things can be somewhat hectic, especially when you're learning for the first time. Second is to make sure you minimize your travel time between crates. So one of the worst things you can do is to come up with a plan or not have really a plan, and therefore you're just opening crates that are in random locations, opposite sides of the room, all that good stuff. Not only is it a real pain for DPS, but it's often difficult for your tank to maintain threat properly on spawns that are far away. So things that are clumped up together, your tank can easily pick up, but things that are far apart, obviously, are much more difficult. Third would be to utilize non-standard DPS whenever possible. So healers are a big source of this, as I mentioned before. Even if your healer doesn't get the Mistweaver Pandaren buff that gives them the wave attack, your healer can and should help out quite a bit on DPS, specifically against the sparks, especially if you have low amounts of range DPS to deal with those. If your healer does get the wave attack, then this is a huge boost. And it's important that your healer focuses on keeping aimed toward the clump of mobs, so that when the wave procs, it will shoot out toward them and do a lot of extra DPS. The fourth tip would be to set up a system for matter scramble from the anima golems, the medium crate spawns on the Mogu side of the room. This one in particular needs to be dealt with properly, and by having at least one person stand in each of the scramble beams when it appears. If no one is standing in one of the beams, it will explode, and again, it won't wipe you necessarily if you're full health, but it's a lot of potential damage. And then finally, assign healers, ideally, and or your tanks to open crates rather than your DPS players. And these people can even open crates preemptively before you're necessarily done with the previous set. You don't want any significant downtime between sets of mobs. So the best way you can get through the DPS requirement is to make sure that your DPS always have something to focus on. So even here, I would argue I'm pretty much a little late. I should have opened those mediums a little bit faster. But basically, you just want to make sure you set up a scenario where your DPS can always be doing something proactive and killing stuff off without endangering the group. So having your healer in particular, and otherwise your tank probably assigned to opening the crates, allows the rest of your group, your DPS players, to focus on doing the damage they need to kill everything. So I think that covers everything. Overall, the fight is one of the easier heroics, but it does take some practice getting used to these mechanics on heroic that you would probably be able to ignore on normal. But it's a lot of fun. The main thing, again, is getting your plan down, your priorities, your ordering for your crates, and then getting your group split up evenly so your DPS is roughly equal in both groups. So that is the heroic raid guide for Spoils of Pandaria. As always, good luck, thanks for watching, and if you enjoyed, please subscribe.